Dear sons and daughters, remain faithful to the precious heritage which this great saint has given to you. It is a magnificent heritage and one well dedicating yourself to this missionary spirituality. Again, Pope Paul VI, on the occasion of the third centenary of the birth of St. Louis Marie de Montfort, said, "Spiritual sons and daughters of St. Louis Marie de Montfort, you have to discover the secrets of your Father, to live and to announce Jesus Christ, the eternal incarnate wisdom, and to make Mary known and loved." The beloved son of our founder, St. Louis Marie de Montfort, St. John Paul II, said, "The spirituality of Montfort is very profoundly rooted in the mystery of the Blessed Trinity and the mystery of the Incarnation and redemption." Today, the whole Montfortian family rejoices at the entry of our founder, who enjoys the heavenly bliss. We gather here to rededicate ourselves to this magnificent heritage, to his vision, to live and announce the eternally incarnate wisdom. My dear friends, each one of us has received the grace and vocation to embody this icon today in our lives and in our ministries as a gift for the church and to the world. Here we have an eminent person, Father Peter Mascarenhas, to help us to understand the way Father de Montfort responded to the historical realities of self and the world and the divine as experienced in a given context of the church of his time. Father Peter Mascarenhas was ordained in the year 1990 as a Montfort missionary in Bangalore. He served as assistant novice master. Later, he took charge of as the administrator of Maria Bhavan, our scholasticate. His studies, he has done his master's in philosophy at Dharmaram Deshetram. He did his licentiate in dogmatic theology in Louvain, Belgium, wrote the thesis on ecclesiology of St. Louis Marie de Montfort, where he did brief study on the Church of France. He is also the professor of philosophy and theology in different institutes. He worked as a formator. He was the rector of Maria Bhavan, involved in formation programs. He served in the administration of the province as the regional superior of India for 2 terms. He taught at Assumption University for 3 years at Bangkok, Thailand. Now he is the director of the Marian Center in Bangalore. I invite Father Peter Mascarenhas to present his paper.
History, this paper going to be. In the afternoon, the session will be a mystery that is present by Father Raja, because Montfort is a mystic, followed by Dr. Dasan, who presents a story, that is the hymns of Montfort. Briefly, the historical reflection of the Church of France during the time of Montfort. You see the title, it's rather long, the geographical, political, socio-economic, religious, cultural context of St. Louis de Montfort, a very long title. However, I would try to reflect a few points from this, because we are already half an hour beyond schedule with our program, so we'll try to do our best with a given time. Montfort is a saint. So every saint, as we see, is a man of the gospel because he or she has bred, nurtured the doctrines, so also the counsels and precepts. The gospel is the divine law, and a saint makes an effort to perfect this divine law, bringing in a harmony between gospel and life. I think Louis Murray entered into that spirit profoundly in his personal life. The gospel teaches us that the poor are an important dimension of our mission, as well as humble people of God, and they suffer for God. Hence, one day they will possess happiness without measure and joy without end. It was precisely this teaching emanating from the humanity of Christ and permeating the pages of the gospel captivated Montfort. So it is, I believe, this spirit of the gospel moved Montfort to step into the grand siècle, that is, the great century. All historians of the church in the 17th century France and 16th century Spain was a golden age, la grand siècle of spirituality, in other words, the golden age of Christian renewal. Jesuit priest Thierry de Chardin, also a French philosopher, tells us that we can say that it was an age of divine milieu, that is, a time of spiritualities, religiosities, religious faiths emerged and began to bloom. When Montfort began his missionary work in the early 18th century, national boundaries of political structures of Europe were very different from today. Often these boundaries were not well defined, so therefore we see quarrels and tensions. And which is not only during the time of Montfort, even today, nations fighting on the boundaries, India, Pakistan, or China, or even states. So this struggle is felt overall, not only in the church, in society. With this, I come to an overview of France. So, as we see, the 18th century, the boundaries of the kingdom were roughly the same as present-day France. The total area was around 500 square kilometers. The total population of France was 19 million, and it was most densely populated country in Europe, comparing to Spain and England. And it is here we see certain parts like Savoy and Lorraine were not included at that time, which is a later development. You have a better picture of France here. And Montfort lives in the region of Brittany, the other extreme if you see. Rennes, where he was studied, Saint Malo, where he was born and continued his ministry. Then he came to Poitiers. So there are a number of places like Briouc, Luçon, La Rochelle. At these places, Montfort preached his missions. So we see the story of France amidst of Europe, the different countries around, French colonial empire, and land acquired by the treaties, the different treaties that took place. The geographical situation. When Louis XIV died in 1715, France had almost reached the present boundaries. Only Lorraine and Savoy were still outside the boundary. Almost 20 years Montfort lived in western France. He preached in Saint Malo and other places. So in each of these dioceses, Montfort gave missions. That is the ecclesiastical map of France we have. Demographic situation. Around 1700, the population of France was 19 million. At the same time, the population of Spain was only 7.5 million. At the time of Montfort's death, the population was only 18 million due to wars, famines. Many people had died an unnatural death, which was a common situation, an idea of the French society. For political situation. Henry IV, the first king of Bourbon dynasty, Catholics opposed him. With the Edict of Nantes, Henry allows the Huguenots. Huguenots are French Protestants, Catholics who converted to Protestantism, to live and worship in France. Devoted for rebuilding France and restoring the monarchy. He died because one of the fanatic Catholics killed him, put him to death. So we have the different kings, just to give you a political situation of France. Before and little later, the life of Montfort. So Louis XIII, 1601 to 1643. So we need to go back in time. Louis XIV's father was Louis XIII, because Louis XIV was called the Sun King. Louis XIII succeeded his father Henry IV as King of France a few months before his 9th birthday. You can imagine, right, at a very early age. Louis XIII's mother was Marie de Medici, and she acted as his regent during Louis' minority. Louis XIII married Anne of Austria. They were both 10 when engaged and 14 when married. And the interesting point is, on their wedding night, Louis XIII was forcibly carried to the wedding chamber, and nurses watched to confirm the act of marriage took place. It took 23 years after their wedding for their son Louis XIV to be born in Château de Saint-Germain-en-Laye. So 23 years after their marriage, Louis XIV was born. So Louis XIV was actually named Louis Dieudonné. It's a French word which says Louis the God-given, because his birth was considered as a society, fought 4 wars, greatly increased France's national debt. This is important for us to know, that to situate our reflection in Montfort's understanding of him through different topics. The wars of France, wars in Europe. Louis expanded French territory through several wars. Franco-Dutch War, gained lands in the Netherlands. France remained as a great power. You see there the map. War of Grand Alliance, everyone versus France. Louis XIV gained Alsace region. Then War of Paris succession, ultimately unsuccessful attempt to take over Spanish territories. Then we have war with the English. So constant wars brought about serious changes in Louis XIV monarchy, also in the society. Absolute monarchy of Louis XIV. Ruled 72 years, dominated Europe. This was the age of Louis XIV, the Sun King, who is called L'État c'est moi. Manipulated affections, ambitions of his courtiers, made sure all government ministers loyal to him only, and tolerated no opposition. An absolute power we speak about here. Tricky balancing act, nobles, peasants, clergy, all had to be managed. At the same time, the reign of Louis XIV is called the Golden Age of France. Louis was personified the idea that the sovereignty and the glory of the nation resides in its ruler, and French culture dominated the society during his reign. France had the largest population in 17 million in 1650, allowed them to keep a big army, and collected a lot of taxes. So again, the story of Louis XIV. The Sun King's military regime. French kings who succeeded Louis XIV added significant but not overwhelming territory. Due to the cost of those wars, for the next 75 years, France would teeter on the edge of bankruptcy. So constant wars with the nations, also wars within on the basis of religion. So therefore, the era of Louis XIV is called absolutism. Since 1661, King Louis XIV was embodiment of the state, having taken all power to himself. His role was puffed up by politically influenced theologians who declared him to be God's assistant. Very powerful. The king lived a life of luxury. The upkeep of his palace was incredibly costly. Life in the palace kept him at distance from the real problems and difficulties of ordinary people. When Louis XIV ascended to the French throne in 1661, Europe was in shambles. Germany's imperial power was shattered by the 30 years of war. Spain also was weakened and was in poor state. Belgium and Luxembourg, adjoining France, were also helpless. So therefore, Louis embarked on expansionism of foreign policy to make France the greatest European power. His nefarious design led other European powers to form the League of Augsburg, which led to a war. So this war crippled the French economy, and the French navy was crippled beyond repair. Louis XIV was called the Sun King, was lucky in having a colonial minister. In the person of Colbert, who made schemes for the overseas expansion of French colonial territories. He encouraged settlements in Canada, India, Louisiana, West Indies, and Africa. So France then, under the reign of Louis XIV, not only restored absolute monarchy, but also developed a true central administration. From 1680 to especially 1700, the political situation was deteriorating. The king hardened his stand on some of his mistaken and arbitrarily made decisions. These included conflicts with Pope over appointment of bishops, the revocation of Edict of Nantes in 1685. Ordinary people, already hit hard by the economic crisis, bore the brunt of these new measures. So conflicts with the church as well as with the kingdom. So brings about struggle in establishing the rule. So that brings us to the economic perspective. Seen as a prosperous period for France and Europe, at large mainly due to the influx of precious metals coming from South America. Metals like gold, silver, spices and other things which very much influenced at that level. This flow of wealth initially made Louis XIV feel that he was strong and rich enough to embark on his military campaign. A brief idea of the economic progress. The French treasury, after a long war, stood close to bankruptcy when Louis XIV assumed, upon the death of his premier minister, Cardinal Mazarin, personal control of the reins of government in 1661. Louis appointed Jean-Baptiste Colbert as finance minister in 1665. And because of the wars, they have to part with the many territories, Newfoundlands. However, his war policy drained the treasury and pushed France to the brink of bankruptcy. Due to this disaster, poverty spread throughout the land. So France turned out to be poor. So there is an interesting, what we call a joke on poverty. Once, no doubt, we have a bishop here. Bishop went to a community and had a very grand celebration. After the Holy Mass, he was taken to the dining hall where a beautiful table was set. Lot of different dishes. So he went around seeing chicken, fish, pork, mutton, and all kinds of dishes. At the end, he came, made a full round to the whole dining hall, and he said, "If this is your poverty, what's going to be your chastity?" So there are many jokes. So though the general hospital or the poor houses were opened, yet the king did very little to alleviate the sufferings of the poor. Montfort was a chaplain in one of such hospitals. Because of such a prevailing situation, Montfort's father, who was a lawyer by profession, had a very little business. He was a poor man. So we have on the top the hospital at Salpêtrière in France, a few pics. So the basic medical amenities were available for the rich but not to the poor. So we are called to situate Montfort in this context. 1700 to 1710, when Montfort was working at the construction of the Ponchato Calvary, despite the prices of food were being very high, he fed the immense number of poor who otherwise would have died of starvation. As Bishop Raja in his homily said, the hand of God was with him. I think that is where he built that Calvary, beautiful Calvary, with so many people feeding every day, and in this context. You may wonder if the knowledge of such phenomena is useful to understand the spirituality of Montfort. In fact, it does shed light on a whole aspect of Montfort's action towards the poor, as well as on his thought. Indirectly, it helps to explain several aspects of his pastoral work too. And most of all, it is impossible to understand the people to whom Montfort addressed if you do not consider the economic and the demographic realities which deeply influence their existence and conditioned their spiritual life. As Marxists would say, that your material circumstances shape what you are. That brings us to the social situation. French society, the higher and the lower strata of society, speaks about the lower strata of society growing into the nobility. The nobles and the higher clergy were the two powerful orders, distinct from the ordinary people. At the apex of the social structure were the nobility, which extended up to the king and went down to sir or sir, a title granted when someone came to possess a property and could therefore buy a title. So once you have money and wealth, you can even buy a title. Montfort's grandfather acquired a property and along with it acquired the title sir or bachelier. One could move up a social ladder if one had the financial means. The social class was therefore more of an economic class. The titles awarded according to the whims and fancies of the king. It is not only just having property, but it was the decision of the king. Just below the nobility were the upper clergy, who usually came from socially upper class. They did not need to pay for the title. This class misused their status and often led scandalous life. They were hardly concerned about religion. It was only from among them that one could become a bishop or an archbishop. There were, of course, some exemplary and pious men among them, but most among them were not interested in discharging their religious duties. So society divided into three estates. First, the clergy. Second, the nobility. Third, the rest of the society. And it's the third estate which paid taxes. And as we see, crop failure and hunger was rampant in the society. So how was the French society unequal? The first estate, it consisted of the Roman Catholic clergy. Second, it consisted of the nobles, around 2% of the population, and owned 20% of the land. Third, the third estate included first the bourgeois, wealthy merchants and skilled workers. Second, the city workers, poorly paid servants like cooks and other attendants, etc. Third, peasants, 80% of the population were farmers. They had little rights and paid half of their income in taxes. So this was the unequal position of the French society. The three estates once again. First, the clergy, approximately 130,000 people, they laid their own law. They had their own law. Second estate, royals and nobles, between 120,000 to 350,000. Then we have the third estate, everybody else, approximately 27 million people. So a large inequality in the society and more poor. Clergy, 1% of the people owned 10% of the land. 2% of the people owned 25% of the land. Middle class peasants and city workers, 97% of the people owned 65% of the land. What about our society today? So this is the context in which we speak. So Louis controls the nobility, required hundreds of nobles to live with him. At least 100 of the most privileged nobles waited outside Louis' canopy, belt, to help him dress. 4 would have the honor of handing him his slippers and holding his sleeves. So speaks about the royalty. So you see that picture a little bit. So the French society, French food, you see frogs being eaten. Some of you may be feeling hungry, so looking at the fish there. It is still more interesting yet. So French civilization in the 17th century. Population stabilized at 19 million in 1700, triple of England, double of Spain. Sizable middle class, fewer merchants, more lawyers, bureaucrats than England. Nation self-sufficient and embarking on world trade. It had the largest navy. Fourth, the dominant culture, paintings of Poussin, Lorraine. Most nations copied French architecture. Bourgeois, writers producing plays for an aristocratic audience. Corneille and Racine wrote austere tragedies. Molière ridiculed doctors and no riches and aristocrats in biting satirical comedies, and mathematics and philosophy. In other words, French society growing in culture and other contexts. The three classes, French society hierarchy since the Middle Ages, pyramid, top king, middle aristocrats, bottom serfs or peasants. So on the ladder of the social status, the poor clergy at the bottom, and you see other profound changes in the society. Then comes the middle class. As we already said, there were professionals, doctors, lawyers, traders, sculptors, and teachers. From among them, the middle class came the writers, poets, and philosophers, who, through their writings, prepared the ground for a revolution in the course of time. And at the lowest rung of the ladder were the laborers, serfs, peasants, who were virtually slaves. Basically, Montfort was concerned about this class of society. So we have a brief picture of the Montfort family, the background a little here. Since the Middle Ages, French society was divided into 3 orders, the clergy, the nobility, and the third estate, each one corresponding to the basic function to pray, to fight, and to work. So in this period, the most fortunate bourgeois succeeded in scales of honor and privileges from bourgeois to nobility. For instance, in the Grignon family, Charles Grignon, great-grandfather of the saint, who seemed to be the first one to settle down in Montfort, is seen rising gradually in the social world. In 1612, he was called the Honorable. In 1616, the Master. And from 1620 onwards, he was called the Sir or the Oak, which proves that he had acquired some land, maybe just a field, and he died in 1630, which is later continued by his family. So grown into a nobility, status of nobility, or nobles. So we have the common people, the poor. In this period, 80 to 90% of the French population was consisted of the common people. Besides insecurity in the face of life, threatening sickness, they also had to cope with epidemics, bad weather, poor crops, increase of taxes, and havoc caused by soldiers. The poor, who had neither a house nor any trade or profession, formed the most humble part of the commoners. In short, the poor were the beggars. I just got a WhatsApp message. The beggar was at a signal. So when to beg, the cars were stopped. As he extended his hand, the car driver gave him 1 rupee. Immediately he turned and he said, "Why this partiality?" "What do you mean?" he said. "At the last signal you gave 10 rupees, he said. "How do you know?" "I had a WhatsApp message because we are in a WhatsApp group," he said. So no doubt we are also in a WhatsApp group, you know that Tercentenary WhatsApp. I congratulate the brothers who made that to help us. So we are talking about the poor, or what we call the beggars. In 1715, that is at the end of the reign of King Louis XIV, they were estimated to be about 2 million out of 17 or 18 million inhabitants of France. So it's a large number. The General Hospital at La Salpêtrière was built, and the king asked the similar structures to be built in other cities of the kingdom. It is not basically to care for the sick, but to house what we call these beggars, wanderers, and bearers of epidemic of germs and rebellion for fronters, to put them together. These structures were more of jails than hospitals for those who were likely to disturb the good society. And Montfort was a chaplain of Poitiers, the General Hospital, in 1701 to 1705. So it is not only the sick who are housed there, but the poor, the wanderers, the beggars. He spent 5 months at the hospital at Salpêtrière in Paris, which then sheltered 5,000 poor. So that is the context in which we are. So, and this Montfort himself addresses in his hymn, in his Canticle 18, the clamors of the poor. We are given nothing, or we are rejected. They think they please us when they persecute us. We are chased, captured, we are put in fetters, and we are even forbidden to spell out our pain. That's what Montfort writes. The number of canticles, one paragraph speaks number 18. And later on, Montfort preached his mission to the commoners of country places and towns. He wrote, "I will bring the good order of Jesus Christ to the poor and the humble." True Devotion, paragraph 56. That brings us to the cultural context of the time of Montfort. To gain a thorough understanding of the particular era, it must be seen from the cultural perspective. This was a vibrant period for the development of culture, art, literature, music, philosophy, and science, because the planks for building the classical style, establishing norms for French culture, which would last nearly 200 years. 17th century was first and foremost a century of words. In other words, the concept of enlightenment, philosophical thinking emerges during this time. It is the century in which the Salon begins, the most important meetings being held at Carnavalet, the home of the granddaughter of Saint John de Chantal, Madame de Swin. She started a tradition of gathering of most popular poets and conversationalists around her on select afternoons. It became a place for honing wits, for crafting intricate conceits, and for expressing the dangerous ideas. That's how we read. During the next century, such gatherings became places where the ideas of enlightenment were tested by philosophers, the places where the first seeds of revolution were allowed to be sown in words before being enacted in deeds. It raised the French language into the highest of art forms. So culture flourished during this time. The spoken word was matched by the written word. So we have the famous writings and philosophers. Descartes supposed the humanism of Erasmus from Belgium, and Ficino in his quest for scientific method in philosophy. Cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. Owes too much to the French school. Culturally, the 17th century can only be described as incredibly rich. That brings us to the religious context. Perhaps the most lasting aspect of 17th century surely is the most living legacy was a spiritual renewal. As I said, Pierre de Chardin called it the divine milieu, place of spiritualities as well as different congregations, and the influence of the Council of Trent felt very specifically during this time. The reforms of Trent were slow in coming to France, but when they came, they found a fertile ground for growth throughout the land. The papacy was restored, the doctrines and dogmas were clearly defined. European religions or the denominations in the 1600 Lutherans, Calvinists, you can see the map. Yellow is Lutherans, blue Calvinists, Anglicans. Then we have Roman Catholic with Protestant minorities, Orthodox, Muslims, and the boundary of the Roman Empire. So we see a scenario in which France was growing during that time, and also the neighboring European countries. So we see very strong influence of Protestantism, also like Luther, Calvin, and Anglican and other denominations brought about influence on the Catholic Church. Religious wars. The 36 years, the French Catholics fought the Huguenot Protestants for control of the French monarchy. In the 16th to the 18th century, the name Huguenot was used to refer to a member of the Protestant Reformed Church of France or the French Calvinists. A series of 8 civil wars between Catholics and Protestants ended with the King's declaration making Protestantism illegal. So wars on what we call different denominations. Protestants fled to nearby Protestant countries. With this, I come to the second part, that's the local Church of France. So far, I just briefly brought to you the social, the cultural, the economic, and the political situation. In the era, the religious life and life in general was characterized by mediocrity and decadence. We have emergence of new spiritual thinkers, or what we call also founders. Francis Sales arrived on the church scene, calling on the church for renewal and reform. Vincent de Paul, a contemporary of Francis Sales, directed his mission to renew parishes throughout France. social strata, we see the clergy, the nobility, and the third estate of the common people praying, fighting, and working, where the respective rules of the three orders of medieval society. Then comes the clergy. Yes. When I speak about clergy, there were these three priests who died and went up to heaven. The first one was a Franciscan. He met St. Peter. He took the book of life and went through, and he said, make 2 rounds to the courtyard. It was a huge courtyard. So he had to run for 2 rounds. Then came a Montfort. He looked at the book of life and he said, go 4 rounds to the courtyard. And he was running and reaching back. There was a diocesan already with a scooter. So the clergy in different levels, yes. This was the highest social order in the kingdom and generally the richest. Canonically, the clergy included both the religious and the secular priests, that is, bishops and priests in charge of the diocesan parishes. The most noticeable social inequality is to be found in the secular clergy. The king appointed the archbishops and bishops and abbots. The clergy was divided as high clergy and low clergy. We have the nobility, occupied the second most domain place in society because of the political privileges which enjoyed. Third, we have the common people. The third consisted neither the clergy nor the nobility, but the largest and the most varied. Traditionally did all the hard work required by landowners and clergy and paid nearly all the taxes. The reign of Louis XIV, the Sun King. The political, where he established a palace in Versailles. The economy, the arts, religious persecution, and wars. I'm not going into detail because we don't have much time, but that gives us a picture of the reign of the Sun King, the Roi Soleil. Religious atmosphere. The most influential class was the middle class, followed with the reforms of the Council of Trent. Catholics had broadened and deepened their knowledge of faith. Seminary training, publication of catechisms, regular Sunday sermons, the teaching of catechism in the parishes and schools effectively combated religious ignorance, making it another rare occurrence. The orders founded in the wake of Counter-Reformation displayed a great spiritual and apostolic drive. The period emphasized a religious renewal more and more. So outcome of that, charitable institutions, established charitable schools. The clerical communities were also engaged in preaching parish missions and gave dynamism to the inner longing of the faith of the devout people. Montfort, being aware of the vast differences in various sectors of life, committed himself deliberately to the common people. Life of faith and clerical life. Religious faith began to flourish. The parishioners showed their devotion by keeping their churches in good state. So commitment to the church, faith began to grow. 17th century also saw the emergence of confraternities, like those of Blessed Sacrament, the Rosary, Virgins, or Poor Penitents. Joseph Grande is the opinion that Letter to the Friends of the Cross, written by St. Louis de Montfort, which is both an exhortation and a set of rules, was written for the confraternity of the Friends of the Cross. And the number of occasions on the one hand decreased, and later there was also an increase in it. So emergence of the new religious families. The missionary and apostolic dynamism was given more emphasis during this time. Then we have the ecclesial outlook, the church position on place. The influence of the Council of Trent. Life of the Christian community of rural areas was centered on parish church. So you will have sacramental activities. The communications of kings were transmitted to the people after the Sunday liturgy, a very practical approach, inviting people to deepen their faith. So Christian life began to grow. Great importance was given to Christian initiation during this time. So that is to say, teaching catechism, preaching, confessions, the sacramental life. The commitment of the faithful was felt by the importance of catechesis, the use of hymns, the institution of confraternities, processions, and the erection of calvaries, which became more meaningful practices of the time. And that's what we see Montfort in all his celebrations brings in these aspects. That's why it is called the century of the souls, the century of saints, and France as the home of the saints. So we have many saints emerged during this time, not only in France, but also in Europe and many other places. It carried forward what we call a historical theology, developed the notion of serious systematic reflection. The biblical studies were undergoing a profound transformation and renewal. There was richness, depth, and variety of its spiritual movements. So the mystical and spiritual thought developed during this time. That's why we see Renault Flemish mysticism, Ruysbroek, Benoit de Kempfeld in England, Ruysbroek in Belgium, and other places. Spanish and Italian spirituals such as Saint Teresa of Avila, Saint John of the Cross, Catherine of Genova were forging a uniquely Christian and French form of everyday mysticism. The spiritualities of major religious orders such as Jesuits, Dominicans, and Capuchins began to flourish, and many other spiritual founders emerged themselves. So that brings about an apostolic inspiration. These religious movements, religious orders continue their missionary work, which takes into very different aspects what we have today, serving people in different levels and different areas, different places with various possibilities. The itinerant preaching in the 16th century and missions of the Protestant countries, exemplified by St. Francis de Sales. However, at the beginning of the 17th century, this movement underwent a decisive evolution, which gave it a unique expression, which was to have repercussions down through the centuries. In other words, so this hunger and thirst for God, God alone was his motto. So search for God profoundly reflected in St. Louis Murray. This motto helped him to be unique son of the church. His unparalleled missionary zeal led many priests and Christians to God. French philosopher Gabriel Marcel has said, to exist is to coexist is to pro-exist, that is to exist for the other. For Montfort, life was to be lived in community, and it was to be lived for the other. Responding to the needs of the church of his time, he dedicated his life in the service of the poor. If for René Descartes it was, I think, therefore I am, then for Montfort, the lavish lifestyle of king, the nobility, and the high class of clergy. The poor had no place in the society. They were used and abused by the top class of the society, as we have already seen. Montfort movement and the popular devotions, culminating in baptismal commitment. In India, the land of the sages and God-seekers of millennia, Montfort stands in good company with his historical tidings. His spiritual teaching holds a great potential for the fruitful and humorous dialogue between East and the West. It is an important task for Montfortians of the 21st century in India to promote his spiritual teaching. His teaching will help us to inform and to be informed, to enrich and to be enriched, to promote communion among our people in India. Besides his spiritual teaching, his zeal for the poor should encourage every Montfortian to work for the poor of our own country. As I said earlier, that God's face emerges among those who are not. We have to work for these people, because when we serve these faceless people, we serve the Lord. As another French philosopher, Edmund Jobs, has said, he has no face, all faces are his. Let us serve everyone. I recall here the theme for our Tercentenary, honoring the past, treasuring the present, shaping the future with greater dynamism and high velocity to be the guiding light. The famous dictum of Montfort is, to know Christ is to know everything, not to know Him is to know nothing. This gives us the key to understand His passionate quest for Jesus, the heavenly wisdom. Hence He was able to declare, wisdom is the cause, and cause is the wisdom. Love is eternal wisdom, paragraph 180. Finally, remember the words of Charles Spurgeon, the British Baptist preacher: there are no crown wearers in heaven who are not cross bearers here below. There are no crown wearers in heaven who are not cross bearers here below. Thank you.
Brief history of the socio-political, cultural and religious structure of France during the time of Louis-Marie de Montfort, and also how Montfort responded to the reality of his time. Human efforts has to be defined, described and determined by the signs of the times. His involvement, Montfort's involvement in the lives of the poor. Thus, he lived a spirituality as responsibility to the reality. It would mean letting the reality come, challenge, upset, move us into action in solidarity with the poor. Thank you for presenting the beautiful paper. As we are running short of time, dear friends, you may be interested in asking questions.
Mr. Suman Singh, just to introduce about the place for 5 minutes, and we will break for the lunch. And second point here is registration fee. Registration fees of 5,000 will be collected by Brother Lourdes, the Provincial Bursar of Hyderabad, and Brother Anthony, Provincial Bursar of Pune. We will be collecting the fee here in the launch here on the right side. And we will be giving the amount to the Leonia, and however, on behalf of organizing committee, we thank for your wholehearted cooperation to reach this place. We also have happy to announce that one of Tercentenary mobile apps have been created. You can you can download from Play Store, and you can upload videos or the photos or the other materials, and it can be viewed by the entire conference, and it is in Play Store. And may I invite now Suman to just introduce about the place for 5 minutes. Program is being listed in this booklet itself, though we are in a half an hour delay, but I hope we are able to adjust. Next session we are back at 2:30. We shall break for lunch. The center buffet is the same place. We have also not only 2 lifts, we have got also the steps on the other side. Just you cut across the where there is exhibition hall is there. The next end is there are steps.